Welcome to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique, and this week we are bringing you the first installment in our new segment for the podcast in partnership with TPS Israel. TPS Israel is Israel's only news agency with over 450 journalists who report 24/7 around the clock to bring factual and reliable news from on the ground in Israel to the media. We'll be joined weekly with one of their reporters to discuss the news surrounding domestic politics in Israel, Israel's security, and regional developments. This week, I am joined by Noah Michaeli. He is a TPS reporter based out of Jerusalem. He was born in LA and went to school at the University of Michigan, and he is currently pursuing a Master's of Science at Tel Aviv University while he continues to report for TPS. This week, we're going to discuss a myriad of news stories coming out of Israel. One of those being news breaking of Gaza Aid Trucks being hijacked by gangs and Hamas members within Gaza. We're also going to discuss the defense industry in Israel and how that's grown since the course of the war. And also news that Bibi Netanyahu will be offering a $5 million reward for any Palestinian who returns a hostage safely back to Israel. All this and more in the following episode. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to the Philos Project channel here on YouTube, and you can follow us on X and Instagram as well. I hope you enjoy this segment. Hi, Noah. Welcome to the Philos Project podcast. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Good to be here.
This is in part. Yeah, so this is our first episode in partnership with TPS-IL, so TPS Israel. Could you give us a little bit background on yourself, both academically and then also professionally?
All right. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I came to Israel in 2019. I drafted to the IDF, and since then I've written for a variety of publications. I was at the Jerusalem Post for a couple of years, and now I'm here working on the news, trying to get the newest stories.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, we're excited to have you. So let's just jump right in because there was quite a bit that happened this week. One news headline that we saw a lot here in the United States was that there was a lot of aid trucks in Gaza that were looted. I think some almost 168 trucks. Could you give us a little bit of information on that?
So that happened I think yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, we had another piece last week, which is I think a big part of the issue is that people don't understand the mechanism of how aid gets into Gaza and what happens to it when it's there. So we had a piece that uncovered that. Actually, on the Israeli side, there's no limitations that are given on aid entering Gaza at all. So in theory, if aid organizations wanted to donate 1 million trucks to Gaza, there's no policy issue that would prevent that on the Israeli side. The only thing that Israel checks is they have to do a security check, obviously, of the trucks entering in. But we have statistics on that too. 97% of all trucks that make it to the border are allowed to pass. They just check if there's anything in there that could be used as weapons or anything like that, but there usually isn't. So trucks are allowed in, but it's once they're inside that there's the issue. There's armed gangs. Hamas themselves co-opt the trucks and then either steal all the aid for themselves or resell it to civilians at ridiculous prices. So that's a big part of the issue. And
So I was going to say it's a security concern for Israel, but then it's also creating a humanitarian crisis internally. How much I saw in the article. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the main issue is just the lack of policing in Gaza. That there's once they leave Israel, we can't do anything to make sure that those trucks get to where they need to be, that they get into the right hands, and so basically they're co-opted by Hamas and other groups in the Gaza Strip.
And I saw in the article from this week that these gang members will charge royalties for the aid to pass, some 20 to 50,000 in exchange for allowing the aid convoys to pass. And then, like you were saying, once in Gaza, either these gangs or Hamas steal and it becomes loot essentially that they sell to Gazans at a really high price. I also saw in the article that Hamas is establishing a new police unit to try and monitor the market and create price controls. Is that a new development?
It is, but what isn't a new development is that for Hamas, being in charge of distributing this aid is essential because that's how they maintain their control over the population there. Once they lose control of the aid, basically they lose all leverage against the population. And so one of the difficulties that Israel is having is we obviously don't want, and it's very difficult to fully govern all of those people there, especially in a hostile population. And ideally, someone else would come in and, at least in a transitional way, deal with that, deal with distributing aid, deal with governing. But you can't do that when Hamas is still there. No one wants to send in their people to govern Gaza when Hamas is still doing terror activities there. So it's a very difficult situation that everyone is trying to figure out. And
yeah, it's very multifaceted. I'll just play. This is just the article for the audience that's watching on YouTube. There'll be a link in the description below if you want to actually read the full-length article. I'm also curious, what is the conversation in Israel surrounding who is governing Gaza? Is that a conversation that's happening at the political level, even amongst the population, or is Israel not there yet?
I think we still have a little ways to go. I think the recent operations in the north are clearing out Hamas are part of that. I think, but again, still, like I said, it's a very difficult situation. It's very hard to go house by house for this entire area and root out Hamas. And it's very difficult to ask members of the international community to come in and govern when Hamas is still present. So somewhere we have to find a balance there. And there may be a situation where Israel has to go in soon and start governing more hands-on themselves. But again, anything more than that is just speculation. So for now, we're holding our breath. We're going to see where we go. But that's the situation.
That's great. You mentioned the north. So let's turn to the north, because I know that Israel sees weapons found beneath Lebanese schoolyards with Hezbollah. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then I also know that they've found evidence that Hezbollah at least had the capabilities, if not an actual plan, to execute something similar to October 7th.
Well, they very definitely had a very concrete plan. We're finding, again, we found more this week, but it's been going on since we've been in Lebanon. We're finding advanced attack tunnels right near the border. So tunnels with kitchens, air conditioning, living spaces. Basically, the plan was to do a even larger October 7th and then to retreat back to the tunnels and hold out there for months if they had to. So they had a huge massacre planned, and the only reason they didn't get to it is because Hamas beat them to it. But so that's part of the issue in Lebanon. And I've talked to a number of residents in the border villages in the north who basically say, I talked to some now, I've talked to some before we went into Lebanon, and they basically say, how can you ever expect us to go back unless Hezbollah is pushed very far back into Lebanon? I mean, right now they can't go back because even today somebody was killed in the north in a rocket attack. But beyond that, just there's high-tech attack tunnels on the other side of the border waiting. So, it's a difficult situation. And I can say just, not as a journalist, just my personal experience. My wife's family is from the Gaza border, from an area in the Gaza border communities. And thank God everyone's okay. Everyone survived October 7th, but it's the same situation there. We can't ever go back to the situation that was before, which is that a couple miles from the border, there are terrorists just waiting. The situation has to change in order for Israelis to be able to thrive in the border region. So that's, I think that's a very understated part of this war, and part of what Israel's trying to achieve is just basic security for people in these areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think here in the United States, we have a bit of an understanding for what that looks like in the South, but we oftentimes forget about the North with Hezbollah, which Hezbollah's capabilities, as you mentioned, far outpace even Hamas's. Is the IDF destroying tunnels in Lebanon like they have been in Gaza?
They are. Again, a big part of what's difficult about this is they, like Hamas, build them under civilian areas. They build them in schoolyards. There was actually saw something recently about that they built, I think it was a tunnel and a weapons storage facility, something like that, under a graveyard in Lebanon. And then you have the moral conundrum of you don't want to blow up the graveyard. And in the end, we ended up we poured cement into the tunnel so that we could leave the graveyard intact, but still take the tunnel out of commission. So it's very difficult technical issues that are going on there. But yes, we are destroying tunnels at the same rate in Lebanon.
Wow. And I also, and maybe you can't speak to this, but I was just in Israel recently and they were talking about how they're finding tunnels even from the West Bank being dug into Israel proper. I don't know if you know anything about that or if that's as extensive as what's in Lebanon and in Gaza, but do you know anything about those tunnels and what that security looks like?
So I know there was a lot of concern, especially in the central region of the central region of Israel, the east of Netanyahu. There's the barrier with the Palestinian areas is very close to the center of the country, and a lot of the residents of those areas, I talked to them, some of them say that they hear digging. All of them are concerned. All of them are concerned that they're within RPG range, rocket fire range of terrorists. And it's a very surreal situation to take your kid to school, you go to work, you're living your life in the pretty idyllic area, but then you have to watch out. What if someone launches a rocket at me from right over there? Yeah. So as far as the tunnels themselves go, as far as I know, they haven't found any sophisticated tunnels that cross over. It doesn't mean that there aren't any. It's the capabilities of the terrorists in those areas are a lot less. And also now Israel's been doing a lot of operations in the Shomron and the Samaria area to reduce terrorism. But no, it's definitely still a concern.
That was my one takeaway being in Israel just a few weeks ago, was how used to the threat of potential violence a lot of Israelis have become accustomed to, which is very hard to fathom here in the United States. So that threat coming from Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in Gaza, and then you also have the West Bank, it means really nowhere in Israel are you like completely safe. And that's just very unique and unusual for someone like me coming from the United States. It's a security concern I'll never have to think about.
Definitely.
There was also,
I'm sorry, I was just saying, it definitely creates a surreal, definitely a surreal experience, even for Israelis who are used to it. I was at my wife's parents' house a couple months ago, and there was a rocket attack, and my wife has a little sister who's 11, and the siren goes off, and everyone starts running. And she goes, wait, and she goes and grabs a bag of chips, and she's like, all right, I need my bag of chips to go, and she's running to the shelter. She's eating the bag of chips, and I thought, she's more used to it than I am. That's I like to think that I'm cool under fire, but she's that's a whole other level.
It is. So when I was in Israel, I was at a Shabbat dinner in Jerusalem, and the host family I was with, the young 13-year-old daughter was showing me her room, which was also the bomb shelter of the house. And she was so casually talking about her bomb shelter that she sleeps in. And then her little brother was talking about ballistic missiles. And I was like, I don't know an 8-year-old in the United States who even knows what a ballistic missile is. And it was just casual conversation for them. So really coming from the United States into that situation, it was really juxtaposed our two different realities in a very surreal way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
It is very, very, very much so. Well, I'm also talking about, Gaza and who's governing Gaza in the South. The top priority is still the hostages. And I know that there was some news that Netanyahu was offering, I think it was $5 million for a reward money for every Palestinian who returns a hostage. Is that new news coming out of Israel? What's the reception been to that?
It is relatively new. Actually, one of our partners, Fox News, picked up on that. So it's always good to see. But yeah, no, it's it's widely supported. We want to do everything we can to get the hostages back. Of course, there's always going to be a little bit of internal disagreements about what the best way to do that is while maintaining everybody's safety. It's a insanely difficult situation to be in. You have to make very, very difficult choices that are very, very high stakes. But I think cautiously optimistic that something good would come of that, of Netanyahu's offer.
Yeah.
But we will see. We will see. In the meantime, everyone's doing everything we can to get everybody back as fast as we can. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that yields some sort of incentive, at least for those who are holding the hostages, to release them or turn them over. So I want to turn also to the industry. I know that Israel's aerospace industry reports its most profitable year in history, and I think that's largely due to the war and demand for producing their own weapons. Do you have any kind of insights, or could you explain that a little bit for us?
So I think that, again, one is, like you said, just demand. I think obviously the demand for weapons, especially defense systems, has skyrocketed every time Hezbollah or Hamas or Iranian proxies in Yemen or Iraq launch a rocket at us. We intercept it. That's where it's coming from. It's coming from the defense systems we're manufacturing, these amazing systems. And so there's a huge internal demand for it. I think another part of it is external demand. I think countries around the world are seeing just exactly how effective these systems are. Israel can absorb daily precise missile fire from multiple countries, ballistic missiles, everything from ballistic missiles to short-range rockets, and can knock them out of the air at a pretty amazing rate. And I think countries are seeing that. And I think especially given what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in the world in general, just geopolitical destabilization, I think lots of countries are looking at Israel and thinking, wow, we want systems like that. So I think that's also a big part of what we're seeing.
Yeah. Has Ukraine become someone who purchases, or a country that purchases technologies from Israel? Is that a formal relationship, or is there just interest and demand created just from other conflicts?
I can't speak to that directly. I know there has been increased cooperation between the two countries, and I know that on the Ukrainian side, certainly I know we've also in Gaza with Hamas, but especially in Lebanon, we're finding more and more Russian-made weapons. And there was actually just 3 days ago, there was a law proposed in the Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, to send all of the Russian weapons that are confiscated from terrorists directly to Ukraine, just for free, to arm them, to disincentivize Russia from arming our enemies. And so I spoke to the Ukrainian ambassador about that one. He's obviously all for it, but we will see. We'll see where things develop. I think there's a lot of geopolitical factors at play, but definitely I think there's an increasing realization in Israel and Ukraine that we're on the same sides of a war fighting interconnected enemies. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting changes there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Iran, Russia, North Korea, even China axis has been dubbed the axis of chaos. So definitely fighting a front that is somewhat united, at least in shared enemies, which that's a brilliant tactic on the part of Israel as well, to send Ukraine
personally, I really hope that goes through.
They seize. That's brilliant. So another industry I know that's done really well, or at least a company, has been El Al, profiting since the war started, kind of being the only reliable airline flying into Israel. Is there any information you could share on that?
Again, El Al has seen a 260% profit this past year. And a big part of that is the cancellations. A lot of other airlines are scared to go to Israel, or if there's certain security situations, Iranian threats, certain geopolitical movements, they'll cancel flights or defer flights. And obviously there's situations where even El Al can't fly, but pretty much if it's possible to fly, El Al will fly. And also I think a lot of Israelis trust, and a lot of international customers too, trust El Al's what El Al does security-wise to keep passengers safe. And so we've seen. So again, so that's a sector that's actually done very well during the war, and as we talked about, the defense sector is also doing very well for understandable reasons.
Yeah, this question you actually might not know the answer to, but way back on my first trip to Israel, I flew on El Al, and someone told me that they have their own missile defense systems on board. Do you know if that's true, or was that something that was told to me to make me feel better?
So I have also heard that.
Okay.
Again, I can't speak to that directly, but if that's something that was told to you to make you feel better, that's also something
they told to
It's also something they told to Israelis to make us feel better. Then,
okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it's believable, but again,
I wouldn't be surprised. It's like folklore. But okay, I was just curious. I've wondered for years. I'm like, wait, was that true, or was I just kind of told that to ease maybe some of my nerves?
That's a good question.
I flew to Israel.
I know they certainly take extra defense measures.
Is it like a
and
secret?
Security measures. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'll look into that, but
I'll have to look it up. Yeah, I'll have to look it up. I know socially there's some news that came out that 85 French Jews have come to Israel. I think we've seen an increase of people making Aliyah to Israel just since the start of the war. Could you speak to that kind of movement to Israel? Why do Jews feel safe in Israel compared to other Western countries or other countries in the world? Because we even talked about there's immense, even psychological effects to living in Israel during a time of war, yet people are still choosing to live in Israel. Why are international Jews are moving from their birth home to Israel, which to a lot of people maybe in the West that's confusing because it's like, why would you want to move to a country at war? We kind of talked about the psychological implications of that as well, living in Israel. What are some of the draws for Jews to return to Israel?
So the Aliyah flight I think you're talking about with the French Jews, that was just this week. But in general, we've seen, I think the most up-to-date figure that I have is 31,000 Jews have made Aliyah which is moving to Israel since October 7th. And obviously, there's both push factors and pull factors. And there's anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has skyrocketed all over the world since October 7th, especially in Europe. So that's one of the big reasons that we're seeing increased numbers from France and from the UK and countries like that. But I think that's the push, but I think there's also a big pull factor. I think there was kind of a bubble after the Holocaust of maybe we're out of the dark ages where Jews are killed. And I think after October 7th kind of popped the bubble. And I think it also, just because it's such a massive traumatic event, that I think it reconnected a lot of Jews with religion and with their culture. I think especially in the U.S., a lot of Jewish people that I know were relatively disconnected from their culture until October 7th. And again, even just speaking personally, I've seen a major change in family and friends since then. And so I think that's a big factor. And I think also, I think people don't want Israelis to have to do it on their own. I think people come to support. People want to be part of it. People want to come home to the homeland. People want a place where they don't have to worry about anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism hiding around the corner. And so I think for all of those reasons, people are coming.
Mm-hmm. We had the pogrom in Amsterdam recently too, I think is another example of that push factor that you were talking about. Do you mind me asking, did you move to Israel with your entire immediate family, or did you make that journey yourself? And then I know you mentioned that you got married.
I made that journey myself. I came on my own. I don't want to go too far a tangent here, but I always had it in mind. And then I finished I got my first degree at the University of Michigan. I finished my degree and I thought, okay, well, either I'll start a career in the US and then it's harder and harder to move, or I'll move now. And so,
awesome.
Sorry, it was important for me to. Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, I think there's a lag. I was gonna say it seems like a story that a lot of young Americans moving to Israel or just maybe outside in the diaspora have to you. It's to move when you're younger, join the IDF, and then start a life in Israel, which I think is really beautiful.
No, definitely. And I also did it because I wanted to serve in the army, and I wanted to come when I was young enough. I wanted to establish myself here, but it just for people listening, it doesn't have to be done that way. I have a close friend, for example, who just made Aliyah since October 7th. He has professional experience in the U.S. and then came over here with that professional experience. It made it easier for him to find a job, to get settled here in that way. So there's lots of ways to do it, and lots of ways to do it.
That's amazing. Another thing I want to touch on is kind of some of the last news headlines we talk about is that Israel's at war, but it's not just surviving, but there's many sectors and industries in Israel that are thriving, including the tech and innovation sector. I know that Israel made some breakthroughs on radiation. Could you talk a little bit about that and what that cancer research has looked like and some of the news coming out of that sector?
So I think the article that you're referring to was about a group of Israeli researchers found a way to half the amount of radiation treatments needed to treat prostate cancer. So it's cutting the amount of time needed to treat it in half, which is obviously it's a arduous process. So that's a big thing. But honestly, there's these are my favorite articles to write. I come from a science background, and so I like writing them. But I always like hearing about new innovations. But luckily, I get to write these sort of articles all the time. There's Israel has Tel Aviv University, Ben Gurion University, and a number of others that do research. But they also have research hospitals. For example, this one, if I'm not mistaken, was at Bellinson Hospital in Petah Tikva, which is a hospital but there's research hospitals all over the country. They collaborate with each other. They collaborate with universities. They collaborate with institutions abroad. And so very, very healthy research ecosystem here that I think the demand for that has only gone up since the war. So that's a very good thing that we're seeing here.
Well, that's amazing. And then I also know that Israel's AI sector is far outpacing other sectors around the world. Could you speak a little bit to that development?
So there was a report that was released recently that we've seen a 173% growth in Israel's AI startup sector since 2014. And again, that has continued since the start of the war. There's, I think one of Israel's biggest exports is its innovation. There's healthcare, robotics, agriculture tech, ways to optimize farming, all these different fields that utilize AI. And Israel is a world leader in that. And again, since the war, that's only gone up. So it's, I think I'm touching back on what we talked about with Jews coming to Israel. I think that that's a very appealing thing for a potential immigrant to Israel when considering how they're going to make money here, how they're going to work here. I think this, despite the war, Israel continues to pull in educated professionals to these professional scientific sectors. So that's another positive update.
It speaks, I think, just to what you're saying, the pull factors and even like the lifestyle offered in Israel, despite of, or maybe even in spite of the conflict and war that Israel is currently fighting. Well, Noah, thank you so much for coming on. You've been very insightful and giving us kind of a broad understanding of the news coming out of Israel this week. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Philos Project podcast, brought to you in partnership with TPS Israel. I encourage you to follow TPS on X to see real-time developments coming out of the region, and to follow the Philos Project on X to see our analysis on developments both in Israel, regionally, and those implications for us here in the United States, and how we as Christians should think about those developments. Please subscribe to the channel. You can also follow us, as I mentioned, on X, but also on Instagram and I will see you guys next week.